On the 30th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler, inside of his Führer bunker, disappeared into his study, along with his new wife, Eva Braun, and outside the door many members of staff, and also a number of friends of the Nazi dictator, waited nervously. They knew what was coming, and at around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, a gunshot was heard. Hitler's valet entered the study and came across the body of Hitler along with Martin Bormann, his private secretary, and with this preparations were then made to try and dispose of Hitler and his wife's body in accordance with his wishes. Hitler was terrified that his remains would fall into the hands of his enemies, but there were a number of high-ranking Nazis who, following the Battle of Berlin, went missing, including Martin Bormann, whose fate was discovered decades later. But one woman, who was one of the final inhabitants of the Führer bunker, was Constanze Manziarly, the cook and dietitian of Hitler, but her fate is unknown, and she disappeared at the end of the war, last being seen following a breakout from the bunker. Let's try and find out what happened to Hitler's cook, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Constanze Manziarly was born on the 14th of April 1920 inside of Innsbruck in Austria. Little is known about her early life, and it's assumed that she had some form of qualifications for being a cook or a dietitian, but she began to work for Adolf Hitler in 1943. It's believed that Manziarly wanted to work as a housekeeping instructor before, however she went to Berchtesgaden and learned raw vegetable food preparation, and nearby to this was Hitler's mountain home. When Hitler stayed inside of the Berghof, his mountain retreat on the Obersalzberg, Manziarly would prepare his meals, and Hitler, it's known, suffered with stomach issues, and he had a very bland diet and a plain diet. Hitler's food inside the Berghof was prepared inside of the kitchens nearby, and it was often transported up to the Kerstein mountain to get to him. But working for Hitler was very difficult, and in letters, Constance outlines how tricky life was preparing food for Hitler. She wrote in one letter in April 1944, "I have to stay as long as he is there. It is my cast iron duty. But what makes me so worn out is the immense burden of responsibility I must bear with it." She had a feeling that I have one foot in the grave, and she noted, "I am not exaggerating. I encounter unimaginable difficulties that I cannot report." But Manziarly's food impressed Hitler, and he had brought her to work for him, and this offer was something that she could not refuse. There were a number of particularities preparing Hitler's food, as he had very specific tastes, and Manziarly stated that, "I bake a lot every day, often for hours, but in the evening everything is always gone." She also noted how she saw Hitler showing others how to use cyanide capsules and demonstrating this to his closest friends and advisors inside of his inner circle, and she accompanied Hitler inside the Führer bunker as the war turned against Germany in 1945. She was brought into the bunker to provide and cook for Hitler and those other people who remained in Berlin in the underground complex. The bunker was a number of rooms, and inside the Führer bunker and the upper Vorbunker were a number of food stores and rooms and also kitchens where Constance worked. The kitchen was fitted with a refrigerator and also a wine store, and it was here where she prepared the food up until the day that Hitler died. But as April 1945 came around, there were many tough decisions which were being made inside the bunker. Hitler would decide to take his own life alongside his later wife, but in the days before he had spoken to his private secretaries and a number of women, including Gerda Christian and Traudl Junger, to advise them to leave the bunker. Constanze Manziarly was also one of these women who were personally requested to leave the bunker on the 22nd of April 1945 by Hitler himself, but all three of the women mentioned refused to do this, and they all volunteered to serve the dictator until his death, and it's likely that they felt they had little choice but to do this. Around this point in the war, Berlin was under heavy attack, and it would have been dangerous to leave, and Hitler, it's believed, then gave all of these women a cyanide capsule for the time, should they want to end their lives, or should they fall into the hands of the Soviet Red Army, who were thought to have been brutes by the Nazis, especially with regards to their treatment of women. Following Hitler's death, there were a few days which passed inside the bunker, and the phrase "time stood still" must have been something that played out for Hitler's secretaries and his cook. There was little for them now to do, except to aid the Goebbels government administration. However, this was very brief, as he would also die inside the Reich Chancellery garden. But then a small breakout group was headed by SS officer Wilhelm Monker, and in this was Constanze Manziarly, Traudl Junger, Gerda Christian, Elsa Kruger, and Dr. Ernst Gunther Schenk. The plan was for them to try and evade Soviet Red Army troops and presumably cross over the lines towards the Western Allies, or to try and hide out. But this was a very dangerous time, and the Soviets were knocking on the door almost of the bunker and the Reich Chancellery. On the night of the 1st of May, and in the early hours of the 2nd of May 1945, Constanze Manziarly and the group, led by Monker, left the Führer bunker. Around 3 a.m, an artillery shell exploded near to the north side of the Spree River, and this killed General Jürgen Ziegler, who was also there. This is important, as one of the breakout group members, specifically Dr. Ernst Gunther Schenk, later said it was with this explosion that killed Constanze Manziarly, and he claimed that following this he did not see her anymore. But there is debate around this. Gerda Christian later informed American sources that after the shell exploded, Manziarly was still with the group, and that she was walking with Gerda along Invalidenstrasse when strafing fire emerged in front of them. After this, Gerda Christian claimed that she saw Hitler's cook then disappear through a hole in the wall, and she claimed that she was never saw again since this point, and Gerda Christian then assumed that Constanze Manziarly had disappeared on her own, and had made a break for it on her own. However, there were more problems, as Hitler's secretary Traudl Junger, who spoke out a lot after the Second World War about the bunker and the final days of the war in Berlin, said something completely different about Manziarly's disappearance. She claimed that that afternoon she and the women had split up from the men to try and blend in, and she then claimed she saw Constance, who was being walked by 2 Soviet soldiers towards a U-Bahn subway tunnel. She allegedly told Junger that they want to see my papers, but this is then considered the last recorded sighting of Hitler's cook inside of Berlin, and still to this day she is classed as missing. No one has ever claimed to have seen her either. The group had walked out of a brewery courtyard where they had been allegedly hiding in a cellar. But there are 3 differing accounts as to what happened with Constance, and they don't offer a conclusive solution as to what happened to her. Dr. Schenk's account has a number of issues with it, and he may not have been the most well informed, and what happened with the exploding shell took place in darkness, and there was distance between those who were inside of the breakout group. But one thing that is strange is that when Traudl Junger mentions the last time she saw her, she claimed that Gerda Christian was also with her, meaning that 3 or 4 of the women of the bunker, Traudl Junger, Gerda Christian, presumably Elsa Kruger, and Constanze Manziarly, had gathered together, and this is considered the most legitimate and proper account as to what happened. If we take the concept and belief that she was led towards the U-Bahn station by the Soviet Red Army, then we must consider a few things as to what may have happened to Constanze Manziarly, Hitler's cook. We know that she had been given a cyanide capsule from Hitler, meaning that there is a possibility she may have used this and taken her life when she was captured by the Soviets. If this was the case, then it's likely that she may have been buried in a mass grave later on, and that the true nature of who she was not found out, meaning still today Hitler's cook is buried inside Berlin in an unmarked grave. Also, we know the chaos that the Soviets caused with regards to women and civilians inside of Berlin, and there was large-scale assault, and Constance was a woman in her 20s, and she was incredibly vulnerable at the hands of the Red Army and the assaulters inside of it. She may have believed that the only way out was cyanide. But there is also a possibility that the Red Army soldiers successfully believed she was a civilian, and that she was led to the safety of an underground station to protect herself from bombing and artillery. The claim that they want to see my papers would have meant that they were investigating who she was, and that if the officers accepted these papers, then it's likely that she would have slipped into the civilian population of Berlin. Traudl Junger later described Constanze Manziarly as the ideal image of Russian femininity, well-built and plump-cheeked, and she may have passed through their fingers, and may have lived out the war in quiet, and may have never been discovered, and then possibly moved elsewhere. But the most probable action is that she did die within Berlin, as in the years after the Second World War, she became known about, and people began to know who Hitler's cook was. But because of the lack of information regarding her death and demise, such as a body, we must still believe that she has disappeared and that her demise occurred inside of Berlin, the final bastion of Hitler's Third Reich. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.